Wow, looks like we're almost at 400 attendees. This is a great turnout for a Monday. We appreciate everyone for being here. Give us just one more minute and we will start with our presentation. I see that there's still a lot of people entering in the next minute or so. So one more moment. All right, with that, I think we can get started. Natalia, if you want to get us going here, we are live on Zoom, on telephone, and also streaming live on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Cody, and hello to everyone. We are so grateful to have you all here, as Cody said, on a Monday, either early afternoon or mid to late afternoon for those folks on the East Coast. We know that you are here to learn about your student loan and also learn very important updates that have just transpired in the past few weeks. So with that, I'm going to introduce our great team. There we go. So I'm Natalia Abrams. I'm the Executive Director at Student Debt Crisis. You probably joined through one of our emails or saw a social media promotion online. We're so grateful to have you here. Student Debt Crisis is a nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to changing the way we pay for education in America and helping all of you pay your loans back until we can change the laws to be more beneficial for all. And we have Cody from our team who introduced at the beginning, and then we are joined by a wonderful partner of ours, Savvy. Lindsay, do we have you on?
Yes, you do. Hi, everyone. I apologize that I'm not on video. My name is Lindsay Clark. I'm Director of External Affairs at Savvy. We are a social impact tech startup based in Washington, D.C. We were founded by policy experts and advocates who came together in recognition of how difficult it was to navigate and manage and repay your student loans. And so they developed a technology platform to help borrowers do just that. And so we're really excited to be here and work with Student Debt Crisis to provide some technology and resources to be able to help borrowers like yourselves actually get enrolled in some of these programs and with their student loans. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit later on in the presentation. We are all student loan borrowers. I am a student loan borrower. My two colleagues who I'm about to introduce are also student loan borrowers. So really excited to be able to be here with you today. I'm also joined by Spencer Dixon from our team. Spencer, do we have you?
You do. Thank you, Lindsay. My name is Spencer Dixon. I'm the Policy and Partnerships Manager at Savvy. I also have student debt. And my main job is to monitor the moving policy landscape and communicate those changes to our users and those folks engaged with our amazing partners at Student Debt Crisis. So I'm excited to talk to you today about some of those updates and how we as borrowers can best benefit from them. From here, I will kick it over to my colleague, Ian.
Ian, do we have you on the line?
Yes, I am here and will be answering questions in the chat, the Q&A, and on YouTube live as we are streaming.
Great, thanks. Back over to you, Natalia.
And that brings up a really great point, Ian. So for all of you folks, we know you have a lot of questions. If you're on Zoom with us, please use the Q&A box. We have lots of savvy and student debt crisis folks here to answer your questions. Then we will also be taking questions from you at the end of the workshop. Don't worry, we've set aside plenty of time to hopefully go through as many of your questions as we can. And you'll be able to ask questions either using the Q&A box, or when we are done with the workshop, you'll be able to ask questions by a hand raise if you'd like to go on audio or video and share your story and ask your question with us. Like I said, we have a couple hours to spend with you, so hopefully we will get to as many of your questions as possible. And I think Lindsay and Savvy covered this, but today's clinic is brought to you by student loan advocates and experts. I will say we are not financial counselors or attorneys, but we have all experienced student loans ourselves and worked in this collectively far over a decade. So we're here to share, what we've learned and the student loan basics, especially for those of you that haven't been able to have your loans on pause for the past, 10 months. And then we will also share a great tool that Savvy provides completely free of charge for anyone on this workshop. And that will be able to help you get into these programs that may seem a bit complicated as we go through them today. But hopefully we can untangle that for you. So we're going to go over student loan basics. What type of loan do you have? Where can you find, resources and important tools? So on to kind of, what type of loan you have. I think that a lot of folks get confused by this, whether they have a federal or private student loan, and then what type of federal loan they may have. So federal loans are loans that have been given to you by the Department of Education. They are going to be, either older FFEL loans or direct student loans, subsidized or unsubsidized, although most of us have unsubsidized loans. These are fixed interest rates set by the US Treasury, not set by the bank, and they offer much more generous repayment options, loan forgiveness programs, and rehabilitation if you get into trouble. Private loans, on the other hand, are going to be, based on your credit history. There's not subsidized or unsubsidized. Your interest will begin immediately. There's many different interest rates out there, sometimes incredibly high. We've heard from you. It's not fixed in that same way, and they're under no obligation to give you repayment options or offer you hardship or when you get into default or get into trouble. So this is an example of the type of loan servicers you may be working with. We all know the big bad Navient or Sallie Mae. Navient could mean you have a federal loan or a private loan. Unfortunately, it all depends on, where your loan is housed. If your loans are at studentaid.gov or with the Department of Education, then you have a federal loan. If your loan is through a bank, say like Wells Fargo, Discover, then, more than likely you're going to have a private student loan. So there are a couple different types of federal loans as well. If you have loans after 2010, you don't need to worry about this. Then you have a direct loan, no ifs, ands, or buts, that's not a problem. But if your loans are before 2010 and you don't remember a recent consolidation, you may have an older FFEL loan. These were loans, I had one of these, my loan actually came from Wells Fargo, then it was transferred to Navient, but even though it was always a federal loan, it remained one of the FFEL loans. And as we get on to repayment programs and forgiveness programs, you'll see why this is so important. So if your loans are after 2010, no worries, you have a direct loan. Before, we need to check and see if you've consolidated or what options you have. The little one in the middle are Perkins loans. These were loans offered to you by your school. And with Perkins loans, you may have consolidated them either into your direct loan or FFEL loan, or they could still be independent. If you're like many student loan borrowers we talk to, you probably have more than a couple of loans. So where do you find this information? So you can go to studentaid.gov. This will house all of the information for your federal student loans. If you don't remember your FAFSA PIN, like a lot of us, you can create an account, log in, and this will be the database to the entire federal loans. You can also go to crisishelp.bysavvy, that's BYSAVI.com. And there it operates very similar to the Department of Education portal, and we'll be able to enroll you in repayment programs, forgiveness programs, and we'll go over that later when we get to the Savvy portion of this workshop. So we know a lot of you are here today to get updates. There's been some recent changes. Many folks have been asking us if their student loans are still on pause, who is eligible. We have been receiving, hundreds of your questions to this workshop, so thank you. So let's get right into it. So federal loans that are federally held by the Department of Education, it's key because of those older FFEL loans we just talked about, unfortunately, about 9 million loans were excluded because they were commercially held. This is at zero fault to you, the borrower. It just had to do with what loans the federal government bought years ago. So what you need to know is that, again, that 2010 number, if you have older, newer loans, direct loans, right now your loans are on pause, and they have been on pause since March of last year and will remain on pause until September 30th of the end, is it 30th? 30th of the end of this year of 2021. So those loans are on pause, but we do know, we have heard from hundreds of you that your loan isn't included. Again, this is to no fault of your own, but the older, half of the older FFEL loans were excluded, along with those school Perkins held loans. In addition, private loans are also not eligible for this student loan pause. So this gets into, the dates that we were talking about. This all started in 2020. It is now set to expire. The key thing you need to see is that third line. President Biden extended relief to the end of September 2021 of this year. So there will be, for a majority of federal student loan borrowers, 0 payments due at 0% interest. That's where we are so far. At Student Debt Crisis, we are definitely fighting for more. So your payments and interest is waived, payment suspended, interest waived. Key to this, suspension counts towards your public service loan forgiveness programs. If you are in the PSLF program and you are still working 30 hours plus in a full-time job, you are still counting credits, even though you're not making payments. The same goes for income-based repayment, that these are months that count towards that 10, 20, or 25-year repayment program that you're in. So that's really important. Currently, you do not need to recertify for income-driven repayment programs, but I will say, and we'll get into this more, it doesn't hurt. You can, if there's been any change in your hours, your job, loss of job, you can always recertify, and we can strongly encourage folks to do this sooner than later, because it's going to be a mess when everyone's loans come back online at the same time. And that's why we're providing you these workshops as soon as possible. And also suspended payments will all count as on-time payments for credit reports. So we're going to just go on a little bit to relief for borrowers in default. Currently, involuntary collections for those same federally held student loans, including tax and Social Security withholdings, are suspended. Employers are instructed to halt wage garnishments for borrowers in default, and any borrower who continues to have their wages garnished can and should receive refunds. And also, this also stops collection activities like calls and letters. You should not be bothered by your servicer right now. And if they have continued to bother you and you have one of these federally held student loans, we want to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to throw to Spencer at Savvy.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Just before I get started, I want to hit on a couple housekeeping pieces. As we've mentioned, we will have an extended period for live Q&A at the end of our presentation, which could be up to about an hour of Q&A. Folks will be able to be unmuted to ask their question if they'd like. So if you would like to ask your question, over the phone, you can raise your hand. So we will collect a group of folks with their hands raised so that we can call on you once we get to the Q&A section. The other thing is, if you'd like to ask your question in writing, it is much easier for our team to be able to track all of that and ensure that we answer your questions through the Q&A function versus the chat. Sometimes things can get lost in the chat. So if you'd prefer to do your question in writing, do Q&A. If you prefer to ask your question over the phone, raise your hand and we will call on you once we get to that Q&A section in about 25 minutes or so. So I'm going to kick things off talking about federal student loan repayment options, and frankly, which are kind of the better ones for a lot of borrowers. First, I'll talk about the standard repayment plan. I'll talk about some temporary hardship programs that really are just that, temporary. And then I'll also talk about what the student loan default process looks like and how you can get out of default if you are in default. So the standard repayment plan is the one that you are automatically placed into when your 6-month grace period is over after you've graduated. This plan puts you on a 10-year repayment plan. That's what the plan is. Because of that, your monthly payment is just going to be based on whatever is needed to repay your loan in 10 years. And with folks with a lot of debt and especially more moderate incomes, that can mean that your monthly payment is quite unaffordable. So even though this is the one that you're automatically put in, for most borrowers, this is really not the best repayment plan for your monthly payment, as well as what you could potentially benefit from in terms of forgiveness programs that we'll be talking about later on. So next slide goes over some alternative options. I will say the ones listed on this slide, these repayment plans, they really don't have a lot of the benefits that income-driven repayments have, which I will be talking about later, but we do want to cover them now briefly just for clarity's sake. So an extended repayment plan essentially takes the standard repayment plan and just stretches it up to about 20 years. So you're basically just extending the amount of time that you have to repay, but that often can mean that you end up paying more over time and you aren't really benefiting from forgiveness programs that are really needed or really depend on the income-driven repayment plans. Graduated is where you're kind of set on like a standard step ladder sort of staircase sort of situation, where regardless of what you're making, your repayment will start low and then gradually increase up over time. But it's not tied to your income. It's just based off of this general theory that you will increase your income over the years. So again, it's pretty rigid and not a great fit for a lot of folks. And then the extended graduated repayment period plan, is just a combination of the two. It extends the amount of time that you'll repay your loan up to 20 years, and then it also puts you on that staircase. But it's rigid and it doesn't really respond to the changing incomes of the borrowers. So next, I'll talk about the temporary hardship programs that borrowers can enroll in. So deferment is deferring your payments. It is often interest will accrue under deferment. Now, forbearance, sorry, I have that mixed up here. Borrowers who have subsidized loans will have no accrued interest under deferment. Under forbearance, borrowers are responsible for accrued interest. The point here on the temporary hardship programs is that they are not long-term solutions. They are pauses in many cases and are not really going to help borrowers get onto a track of repayment and especially any sort of forgiveness. The one exception is the pandemic-related administrative forbearance that anyone with federally held loans is currently on. No interest during that period. And there are some benefits from that. But what I'm talking about here on this slide are the traditional deferment and forbearance programs that, again, aren't really long-term solutions to the problems burdened by borrowers. So next, I'm going to talk about student loan default. So first, just level setting on what some of these terms mean. Before you get into default, you are actually in delinquency, which happens anytime after your payment due date. So if your payment due date was tomorrow, the 26th, and you did not pay by the 27th, you are in delinquency. That period lasts for 90 days. Once you are past that, you are in default. And by being in default, you get locked out of forgiveness eligibility, at least once you're still in default. And there can be harmful effects on your credit. As much as humanly possible, we want to avoid borrowers going into default. And there are other programs that we'll be talking about that provide you, can shield you, can basically mean that you don't have any payment due. So you want to avoid default at all costs. If you are in default, the next slide, I'll talk about how you get out of it through rehabilitation. So you need to return your federal loans to good standing by completing a specific program, default loan rehabilitation. Borrowers must make 9 payments in 10 months. So once you get in default, it can really take quite a while to get out of default. Payments are voluntary and must be reasonable and affordable. So, you know, your payment due might be less than what was under the standard payment, but you still do have to make those payments. So it can be as low as $5 per month. And this program can only be completed once. So once you go into default, this rehabilitation program is kind of only a one-time get out of, I don't want to say jail, get out of, default-free program, if you will. But getting into default is something that we definitely want to avoid. So what I've been alluding to throughout is are these income-driven repayment plans, which can really be a longer-term solution, at least under the current student loan policy that we're under for borrowers. I'm on an income-driven repayment plan in order to benefit. So I'll talk a little bit about what they are. I'll talk about the enrollment process and the application process. So what is an income-driven repayment plan? They are repayment plans that are based on your income, so that what you pay is tied to a formula based on a percentage of your discretionary income, which is basically income over the federal poverty level. And it does take into account not only your income, but also your family size. So if you have dependents, your monthly student loan payment will actually be lower under an income-driven repayment plan. So this slide, I'm going to talk about very briefly what the different repayment plans are and kind of what their parameters are. I won't actually go one by one, but as you can see, those plans are based off of varying percentages of discretionary income and also have different maximum timeframes that you can be on them. And those timeframes are tied to potential forgiveness that you can get after you've been through the program. So I know in previous webinars, we've had folks who may not be on track to do public service loan forgiveness, which I will talk about in a bit. If you are not, working for a nonprofit or working directly for a government entity, there are forgiveness possibilities after these timetables on this screen here. So next is enrollment. How do you enroll in an income-driven repayment plan? Next slide, please. Before we get to that, just some quick examples of how you can benefit from this. So if you are not making any income, your income is zero, under the standard repayment plan, you would still be required to make a $364 payment to your student loans. And this is, of course, before COVID, right? If you were making $25,000, you could pay as little as $49 a month under income-driven repayment. The point is here, under a standard rigid 10-year repayment program, which is again the one that you're automatically put into, it's rigid. It's not going to respond to your income, whereas income-driven repayment plans can respond to that and really be adaptable, not just to your income, but the change in your own income, which is something that we're going to talk about in a bit, how COVID has really impacted a lot of folks' income. Usually it's dropped. An IDR can respond to that. So the enrollment process, you do have to fill out an application, pick a repayment plan, and then you have to provide some proof as to what your income is as part of that application, and then you must recertify it within 12 months. Now, the current pause on payments and interest has basically put a pause on the recertification process. But once that ends, the recertification of your income will also begin. So next, I'm going to talk about the checklist for a repayment plan. You can visit studentaid.gov to read up more on some of the information that I went to. You can contact your loan servicer for the application, submit your application, and then you reapply. We have a tool through Savvy, where I work, that helps you through this checklist. Gets it all together in one place. You can go to crisishelp.bysavvy.com. I'm sure my colleagues are furiously dropping that into the chat when folks are asking. That is the place that you can go to get through this checklist and put in information that is unique to your situation and get some help through an income-driven repayment plan. I might touch on it a bit, but it's worth making a point now. Even if the amount that is due is zero, even if that is zero because of the COVID forbearance, there is still immense benefit from enrolling in an income-driven repayment plan even now, because it'll lock in what you are owed, what is due on your student loans based off of your current income, in these challenging times. So even though you may think, I don't have anything due right now, maybe I don't need to do anything, we really encourage you to go to crisishelp.bysavvy.com to enroll in an income-driven repayment plan, because there's still immense benefit down the road. So next, I'm going to talk about the bucket of forgiveness. I've talked about some of the programs that exist kind of to help in the moment, helping with your monthly payment. But like all borrowers, or almost all borrowers, you want to see if there's other programs that could wipe away some of the debt that you do have. So I will be talking about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, what that application process looks like, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the other forgiveness programs that exist out there. So especially for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, you really get your maximized benefit by combining being enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan and then applying for the loan forgiveness. On the one hand, it is really required. If you are stuck in a standard repayment plan and you work for the 10 years, you're not going to get any benefit because you paid for 10 years. And as you'll see when we go over the eligibility, that wouldn't make any sense. So in order to even unlock the forgiveness benefit, you have to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. But it really comes down to math. Income-driven repayment plans, by and large, lower your monthly payment so that you pay as little as possible while you're trying to, show your 10 years of repayment, your 10 years of work. Then you can unlock forgiveness because you want to kind of push as much of that debt onto the forgiveness program and pay as little while you're on that track. So I'll go over on the next slide the overview of the program. So Public Service Loan Forgiveness was started on October 1st, 2007. That is significant because it only applies, the program only applies to loans that were taken out at that point or forward. There are possibilities for consolidation and other things that can kind of retroactively apply in some cases, but that's really the start of the program. You have to make 120 monthly payments, which equates to 10 years. If you've done that and you meet some of the other eligibility that I will go over in a second, you can have all remaining debt forgiven tax-free. So this program, it's kind of the good, bad, and the ugly, right? There's been some stories about the challenges of applying and all of that. And, by and large, that was because servicers did not do their job to inform their borrowers. And we exist at Savvy and along with Student Debt Crisis to cut through that, to make sure that folks can dot their I's and cross their T's so that their chances of getting success out of this is much, much higher. But the point is, when done correctly, when you've put your ducks in a row, this program can really unlock a huge burden for borrowers. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the PSLF actual, process, the checklist, if you will. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our checklist snake situation, if you will. And you have to ask yourself these following questions to make sure that you are on track for public service loan forgiveness. So the first question is, do you have a direct loan? A direct loan, as my colleague Natalia mentioned, is a loan that is given, as the name suggests, directly from the federal government. If you have a FFEL loan, that is not a direct loan. So in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness, you have to have a direct loan. Your second question is, does your employer qualify? I'll go over in a second exactly which ones do and do not, but by and large, it's nonprofits and government entities qualify for the program. 3, are you in a qualifying repayment plan? That is an income-driven repayment plan, or technically a standard repayment plan is acceptable, but as I've mentioned, because the standard repayment plan is 10 years and you have to be working at a qualified employer for 10 years and repaying for 10 years, if you only are in a standard repayment plan over the course of this, you will have paid off all your loans by the time that you unlock your forgiveness. So really, it's about being in an income-driven repayment plan. However, if you've previously made some payments through the standard repayment plan, those credits could still count. So next, do you have your documentation in place for your employment using the public service loan forgiveness form? If you work for a government or a nonprofit, you have to document every year that you worked during that time, and your employer or an HR person will sign off on that. If you have not done your annual certifications, but you think you might still qualify for public service loan forgiveness, you can retroactively go back and get those forms signed for the years that you worked. So it's not like there's a due date every year, but you do need to have 10 forms for each year that you worked for a qualifying employer. Once you've done all that, once 10 years have passed and you've made 120 payments, then you apply formally to have your remaining debt wiped out. So that is the rough timeline, and that is the checklist that you need to keep in mind. But here at Savvy and at SDC, we can help get you through this checklist. So here's where I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about what qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. Any of the direct loans, as I've mentioned, employers are all levels of government, state, local, and federal. And when I mean by that, I don't just mean civil servants. Teachers, you of course are, as long as you work for a public school and not a private school, you benefit. Firefighters, librarians, anyone where you are, it's basically public sector. Are you in the public sector? The other big category are 501c3 nonprofits. And then, as I've mentioned before, the repayment plans that are eligible are really the income-driven repayment plans, but you also can have the 10-year repayment plan qualify, but you do not want to be in that for the whole time. Otherwise, you won't have any forgiveness at the end of your journey. So what does not qualify? As I mentioned before on the loans, any FFEL, federal family education loans, and those were loans where you had a private, entity handle and do the actual lending. That program ended in 2010. So if you have loans from before then, in all likelihood, those are FFEL loans. Perkins loans, which are loans that you got from your school, those do not count. Any loan that is in default, that does not qualify when it is in default. Now, remember I talked about the rehabilitation program. When you're in default, when you're in rehabilitation, those payments are not going to count. But once you get those loans out and you qualify in all the other ways, those new payments can count towards PSLF. So I would hope for anyone, or excuse me, I would hate for anyone who is in default to think that they are, that there's no relief for you when it comes to PSLF. Any private student loan, anything like that does not count. In terms of employers that do not count, government contractors. So if you work for a defense contractor, or you work for a company that paves highways, even though that money is technically public money, you are working directly for still a private entity. So those don't count. Labor unions do not. Partisan organizations do not count. And then repayment plans that do not count are those first three that I mentioned, the very rigid ones. Those do not count. However, there is a temporary program created to kind of retroactively count payments through those. I will touch upon that briefly. And then deferment, forbearance, or default do not count. But with the exception, I know this is all kind of a lot, but with the exception that the COVID forbearance does still count for credits, which is actually the next slide, the point that we want to make here. So we want to put the public service loan forgiveness in the context of the current pandemic relief. So pauses on payments and interest for the federally held student loans started in March 2020, which unbelievably is almost a year ago. And that's going to extend at least through the end of September 2021. That's 19 months. That's a pretty long time. So if you're on the PSLF track, this forbearance could get you nearly 1 out of 6 of your credits essentially for free. So remember, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. 19 of those payments during the COVID forbearance do not require any actual money payment, but as long as you are meeting all the other qualifications for public service loan forgiveness, you're still accumulating those credits over time. So these credits will not have to be paid back if you are on either a public service loan forgiveness track or even the longer term kind of 20-year, 25-year non-public service forgiveness track. And as I've mentioned throughout, the Savvy tool can help you take advantage of what we're really calling partial student loan forgiveness through these 19 months. The Savvy tool can help with this. The last thing I'll say on this is, I work for Savvy. My colleagues at Student Debt Crisis, I'm sure, will make this point even more than I will, that we are just pointing out here the fact that these 19 months really could have a positive impact on your longer term debt burden, but it does not by any means serve as a comprehensive solution to the student debt crisis. And there's a lot that needs to be done to make changes to get us to a better system. So closing out here, I wanted to talk a little bit about the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness program. I mentioned that at the on the screen where I was talking about repayment plans that do not qualify. So this program was created after 2017, when the first batch of borrowers were starting to apply for public service loan forgiveness. And what really became apparent is that many borrowers who were frankly told incorrect information by and large, from their servicer about which repayment plans were going to qualify, realized that all of those years of repayment, were not going to count. And so Congress created a temporary program to allow borrowers to go back and document payments that they made through either the extended repayment program, the graduated repayment program, or the extended graduated repayment program. You do have to go through a process of applying on the same form that the normal PSLF process is under. We mention this because folks who are out there who thought that they did everything that they needed to do and got denied, I hope you hear the message that there is still hope for you, that you could have a program that could still get you some support, and Savvy can help you get through that. And then the very last thing before turning it over are just some of the other forgiveness and cancellation programs that are out there. If you went through school and then suffered a total or permanent disability, you could have your student loans discharged. If you went to a school that closed either while you were still enrolled or within just a few months after you left, you could have your loans discharged through a program called closed school discharged. If your school defrauded you and misled you and did not really provide you value, there is a program called Borrower Defense to Repayment that you could get some relief from and have your loans wiped out. There are others, in the tragic case of a borrower dying, those loans can be discharged. Those would not have to be passed to any survivors. We're not going to go into detail into some of these, but there are these other programs out there that we want you to be aware of. So in terms of closing out, your checklist, similar to the income-driven repayment checklist, you can go to studentaid.gov to find this information and to get more details into some of the things that I've already talked about. You need to verify that your employer qualifies and keep that annual documentation. There is a specific form that you can find online to get your employer to fill out with you. You need to make sure that you enroll in a qualifying repayment plan and then continue to work full-time, which is measured as 30 hours at least per week, either for a government or a nonprofit, and complete those 120 payments. And again, during the COVID forbearance, where there are no payments due and the interest is paused, as long as you're adhering to the other parts of the eligibility, you're continuing to rack up those credits without having to actually make any payments. So you get essentially 19 of those 120 for free, so to speak. All of this we can help you with through the Savvy tool, going to crisishelp.bysavvy.com. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lindsay, who is going to walk through what that tool is and how it works. Lindsay?
Awesome. Well, first of all, just round of applause for Spencer there. You just got through a lot of material, and always appreciate your expertise. And just a quick reminder for those who might be just joining or still on with us, for any questions that you might have, please direct those to the Q&A box, not the chat. It's far easier for us to be able to answer you directly and make sure that we've caught every question that comes through. It's very easy for us to miss those in the chat just because of all the back and forth, which is great. We appreciate everyone commenting in, but just want to make sure if you do have a question, we're able to address it. So using the Q&A box. And then for those, when we do reach sort of the official Q&A portion of our town hall, for those who want to ask their question out loud, get a chance to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we can cue you for that opportunity. We'll try to get through it as many as we can. All right, so I know that might have been a lot of information for you to process and take in, but that's why we saved sort of not the best for last, but somewhat of a tool and a resource and a solution to help you actually take some action around your student loans, and that is the Student Loan Aid Tool by Savvy. So if we quickly go to the next slide. For those that might not have been on in the beginning, just a quick refresher on who we are at Savvy. We're a social impact tech startup based in Washington, D.C., working to solve the student debt crisis by helping borrowers like myself and you all to navigate this complicated repayment and forgiveness process. So Savvy's innovative online platform, you can kind of think of it like a TurboTax for your student loans. It helps borrowers sort of better understand their debt, optimize their repayment options, some of those repayment options, like the income-driven repayment plans that Spencer was talking about, and then actually get enrolled in the best plan for their financial needs. That oftentimes is somewhat the hardest part, especially when you have to interact with your dreaded student loan servicer. So if we go on to the next screen, in response to COVID-19, Savvy teamed up with our dear friends at Student Debt Crisis, and we created a completely free version of the Savvy tool to aid borrowers whose incomes have been negatively impacted by this pandemic. And so you basically, by answering some basic questions about your income and employment situation, are able to determine whether you could get enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan for as low as $0 a month. And then we actually help you to basically digitize and submit that application to your servicer instantly. So if we go on to the next screen, you're going to see a bit about what this tool includes. So like I said, you're able to sync your federal and private student loans. We use Plaid technology, which if you have a Venmo account, you've used Plaid to sync your accounts. It's just that easy. You're able to see sort of a personalized repayment and forgiveness options if you're eligible. And then most importantly, we automate that enrollment in that income-driven repayment plan. So I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat again for everyone to access. But really for anyone particularly who has been negatively impacted financially, it is so important for you to take advantage of these already existing income-driven repayment plans to lock in that low monthly payment. As far as the CARES Act extension right now, most of you are hopefully not having to make monthly payments, but when those payments do resume in September, that's going to be an unwelcome surprise and shock for many people. And so what you can do right now is if your income has been negatively impacted, or your income lowered by any, hours reduced, salary reduced, or you've lost your job entirely, your income is $0. By submitting that IDR application now, when your income has been impacted, you're able to lock that in for 12 months. Now, that 12 months doesn't start until payments resume at the end of September. So that's not only pretty much the most of this year that you're going to have to make no payments, but then once payments go back into effect, if they do, that's when that 12 months of a $0 payment will start. So really, you're able to optimize around this to take advantage of very little to, if any, payment for well over a year, maybe into 2 years. Based on when this started back in March. So we're really excited to be able to offer this to you all. Again, I put the link to the tool in the chat. That's where you can go directly, crisishelp.bysavvy.com. And we are going to be working with Student Debt Crisis to, I'm sure, host many, many more of these for borrowers like yourselves, and or if you have friends, family. Student debt is an issue that impacts so many of us. And if you have student debt, it's guaranteed that someone with student debt, whether they be related to you or a friend or whatnot, a colleague. And so we hope that you spread the word about these going forward to any of your networks, so that more borrowers can become informed about what's going on and empowered to help sort of tackle this. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Cody and team, who's going to talk about how you can take action for change. I know this question has come up a bit in the chat, so super excited to hear from the SDC team. Oh, STC, you might be on mute, or maybe I'm not hearing you.
Hey, y'all.
You're cutting out a little bit, Cody.
How's that?
That's better. There's a
Perfect,
bit
of course. Always a little bit of tech issue there. Well, great. So thank you so much, Lindsay, and the folks at Savvy. Obviously, the education and outreach side of this crisis is so important. But here at Student Debt Crisis, along with education and outreach, we are fighting for you. We are fighting for 45 million Americans with student loan debt. That includes me. Spencer mentioned he also has student loan debt. We are made up of a team of advocates and experts that really do care because we live this. So one thing I really want to talk about when it comes to the movement on the advocacy front is what is going on with canceling student debt. I know a lot of people have questions. I know a lot of folks, even on today's workshop, have put in the Q&A that they're confused. So we want to make sure you understand where the progress is and what next steps look like. So with a new president in President Biden and a new Congress, we have now a set of policymakers and lawmakers that have expressed support for canceling student loan debt. On top of that, we are proud at Student Debt Crisis to be part of a large coalition of organizations that are advocating for this permanent relief. So to clarify, what is proposed at the moment? So President Biden has said he wants Congress to pass $10,000 in debt cancellation in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. On top of that, when he campaigned for president, he also supported canceling all student debt that was related to tuition costs at public colleges, and this would apply for anyone earning under $125,000 per year. Now, again, it's really important to note that these right now are just his proposals, and this has not become law yet. Now, others in Congress are saying the president can take action immediately. So we have Senators Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, along with members of Congress who have introduced resolutions in both the Senate and the House urging Biden to use an executive action to cancel student debt immediately. What that means is that the president could cancel a broad amount of student loan debt without having to push it through Congress where it may get hamstrung by opposing views. If you believe that student debt is a crisis during the pandemic and that borrowers can't wait a second longer for relief, we need this type of action. And so we are part of this. And as I mentioned, over 325 organizations, these are civil rights groups, consumer groups, veteran and student groups. We all joined on in a broad coalition, a diverse coalition, and sent a letter to Biden urging him to do this action, to take executive action and to cancel student debt. So far we have several proposals in the works. I would call this the closest we have ever gotten to passing debt cancellation, but the fight isn't over yet. So how can we make it a reality? Step one is that we need our voices to be heard. So we are calling on all of our supporters to share their stories because story sharing is actually one of the most important ways that we can influence the perspectives and opinions of lawmakers. And so here is one story we received recently. This is from Danielle in Tennessee. Danielle, says that between her husband and her, they pay about $1,200 in student loans per month. That's a very common experience. They are grateful that they have not had to make payments during the pandemic. So we want to recognize President Biden for extending that relief through September. But borrowers like Danielle know that much more can be done. So I'm going to put in the chat box a link to a story share page. If you want your voice to be heard, I highly encourage you, please share your story. None of these are published publicly without your permission. We just want to collect stories so we can hear from you, hear your opinion, and hopefully we can echo your voice when we talk to lawmakers. So I will go ahead and put that in the chat box as well. All right, so I think we are at the point of the presentation that many of us were waiting for, and that was to address some of the questions.
That's right, Cody. So this is Spencer again. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and continuing to stay on. I've gone through a couple of the questions, and there's a few just because of their complexity. We're gonna answer out loud. While I do that for the first few, I see folks raising your hand. That's amazing. We're gonna kick it over to the folks who are raising their hand, and I believe either Cody or Natalia, you'll be able to unmute folks who have their hand raised. So before we go over to those, someone sent in a question saying, I have two FFL loans with over 6% interest. Can these be consolidated into a direct loan in order to benefit from relief packages? If so, would the overall balance increase? Does it matter which repayment plan I choose and with which servicer, and which needs to be done before any new legislation? So Cody, do you want to take that? I'm happy to do so otherwise.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Spencer. That's a great question. You know, so borrowers who don't currently qualify for any of the federal programs we're talking about, that includes specific income-driven repayment plans, public service loan forgiveness, and even COVID-19 relief. They do have an option to consolidate into a new loan. And so consolidation would create a brand new student loan under the newest program. That's the direct student loan program that we've been talking about. So consolidation is this fantastic tool that borrowers have. The big problem is that consolidation, it is creating a new loan. So because of that, there are a myriad of consequences that happen when you consolidate. For example, if you had any interest accrued, that is added to your principal balance on the new loan. So your balance may actually go up. If you've made progress towards any of the repayment programs we've talked about, let's say you're 15 years in on your income-driven repayment plan, if you consolidate, that new loan is a new loan, so the clock starts over. So while consolidation is a powerful tool that borrowers can use, it's really important to understand the consequences of making that action. So, you know, visit studentaid.gov, that's the Department of Education's website. Make sure you understand what consolidation means for you before you take any action like that.
Thank you, Cody. Looks like we have a fair chunk of folks with their hand raised. So perhaps we could switch over to that as I pick out a few more questions from the Q&A.
Sure. I'm going to go in order here as I see it on our Zoom platform. I see Katarina's got her hand raised. Katarina, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk. So let's see here.
Hi,
All
can
right.
you hear me?
Hi,
Can you hear
Katarina.
me? Hi. Well, thank you so much, guys, for having this meeting. I really, really appreciate it because I have a ton of questions and can't seem to get any answers anywhere. I am in the income-based repayment program, and I do have the FFAL loan, but I'm not exactly sure how that works. So should I be eligible for the forgiveness program at a later date or not?
I can answer this. Katharina, do you work for a government or a nonprofit?
I do not.
Okay, so I alluded to this very briefly in my presentation, but maybe to take a second to explain. If you are not on track to do public service loan forgiveness, you do still have the possibility of having some of your loans forgiven through the income-driven repayment plans. The only difference is the timeline is just longer. So if you are enrolled in certain IDRs, you can have the remaining balance of your loans forgiven after 20 or 25 years. I know that's a long time, and I certainly wish it weren't that long. But I did just want to make the point that there are other forgiveness options, even if you aren't in the public sector. So did you remind me again, did you say if you're already enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan?
I am.
Okay. So I guess the point I just wanted to make there is, depending on how long you're planning to be in a certain career path, forgiveness options are still out there, even for FFEL loans. We just encourage you to make sure that you check which IDR you're in and what that timeline is. But there is still hope for you. Cody, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's great. Spencer, I think you did a good job, but I just double down on this importance of understanding the different loan forgiveness mechanisms that exist. So, as Spencer mentioned, if you complete an income-driven repayment plan, there is a forgiveness mechanism at the end of that. And public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness, and other cancellation and discharge programs exist. Now, the really important thing to mention there, and Spencer discussed it during the workshop, is that you can do both simultaneously. So you can be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, and while you're making progress in that track, you can also be on track towards public service loan forgiveness as well. So it's not and or. These types of the repayment plans and the loan forgiveness programs are often working at the same time.
Okay, thank you so much. And just another quick question I have is, does marriage in any way affect the income-based repayment program?
That's a really great question, Katerina. So it does. So when you're in an income-driven repayment plan, as Spencer mentioned during the presentation, your monthly payment, instead of it being based on your loan amount, is based on your income and your family size. So borrowers that file their taxes as married and file their taxes jointly will have their combined income used for the calculation of their repayment plan. So there are some borrowers that will choose to file their taxes separately, and that allows your individual income to be used for the program. Obviously, that opens up a box related to what is best for your tax and finance situation. We're not financial counselors, so I can't give advice on that particularly, but it is an option that some borrowers choose to use.
Okay, that makes sense. So it does matter if you file separately, married but file separately, right?
Lower your monthly payment because when they go to calculate your income-driven repayment plan amount each month, they will be using just your individual income as opposed to your combined income with your partner.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. All right, I see some more folks here. Let's go to Terrell. I'm gonna go ahead and unmic, allow you to talk here. Go ahead, Terrell. Terrell, are you able to unmute your mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I am currently a healthcare worker, and I also am in the income-driven program. I'm trying to buy a home, and I just want to know, is it safe to continue, like if I'm paying the interest? I'm not in default. I'm current. Of course, they have us where we don't pay until, what did you just say, to September? Is it advantageous to continue to pay the interest on the loans, or how do I go about that? I'm just trying to figure it out.
That's another one of those personal finance questions that maybe is hard to answer directly. I'm not sure I can give you a response about what the best choice is for your finances, but I can give you some context that I think is important here for people who are in this position. So first and foremost, related to the COVID relief, borrowers that have their payments paused at the moment, should also see that their interest is paused. So your loan balance shouldn't be increasing during this time, meaning you shouldn't be in a worse off financial situation based on your loan amount when it comes to applying for a mortgage. What has happened during this time, and I'm actually one of the people that have been victim to this, some borrowers early on in the pandemic, when they were placed in this automatic pause on payments, had a ding to their credit, and that was not supposed to be the case as the law was written. Most of those erroneous credit reporting issues have been resolved, including my own. And so it's less common that people are still dealing with that. But that is also another issue that could impact, obviously applying for a loan if they are reporting that your loan is possibly in forbearance or deferment when it's actually on this pause that was part of COVID relief. So that's something to be aware of. The last part that really can be problematic for student loan borrowers when they are applying for a mortgage is how the lenders take a look at your income-driven repayment plans. And so for years, we've been part of a group of folks advocating that a lower monthly payment in an income-driven repayment plan should be recognized as a lower monthly debt burden. And so what the problem was for years was if you had a $0 monthly payment in your income-driven repayment plan, mortgage lenders still wanted to look at your monthly student loan obligation as whatever your monthly payment should have been if you were in the full 10-year standard repayment plan. And that's not the reality. So many borrowers are saving $400 or $500 a month on their payments. And that should help them when it comes to determining how much is available for them to afford on a mortgage. There have been some updates, particularly Fannie Mae and some of the large lending institutions have provided guidance that have helped correct this problem. I would speak with whoever you're working with on the lender side for your mortgage to better understand how they're looking at your student loans and make sure that they're following the most updated guidance.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for joining us today. All right. We've got next, I see Christian's here. Christian, I'm going to go ahead and open up your mic. You're good to start talking. Go for it.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Thank you guys first and foremost, like everyone said. This is the first time I've attended one of these webinars, and I feel like I've definitely helped and learned a lot. And so thank you guys for all you doing this, and can't wait to learn more. My question is, right now I have a total of $70,000 in student debt. Graduated last year. My approach, and I wanted to run it by you as far as like how me and my family are approaching the loans. And I just wanted to run it by you guys and see if that's something that you agree with, or how else I could kind of, go from there. So the loans are actually under my father's name, who, and I highlighted this because I saw that you mentioned it. He had a disability, so now he's on permanent disability. So we're also considering maybe it's a possibility for us to obtain the total and permanent disability discharge forgiveness, but that's a whole process in of itself that will take time. The way that we're handling the loans now is, like you guys mentioned, there's no interest, there's no payments that have to be made until September. So we're just simply not making those payments. But what we are doing is we're still putting every month, we are putting a set amount of money every month into an account. And then so come September, we're going to be ready to have, a couple thousand, hopefully by then, to, put that money out if need be. But that's how we're approaching the loans as of right now. Just, not making any payments. There's no payments, no interest due until September, letting money accumulate on the side. And then come September, that's when we're going to be ready to start making payments. But I just wanted to run that by you guys and see if maybe that's the best approach as of right now for people who may be in my situation, and so forth. But just wanted to see what your guys' opinions would be. Hello.
Yeah. So, Spencer, maybe I'll dive in, and maybe your team has some information related to the disability discharge and whatnot. But Christian, it sounded like your parents likely have a Parent Plus loan. Is that correct? This is a federal loan that your parents got
Correct.
from the Department of Education to help
Correct.
support your education?
Correct.
Okay, good. So, the first thing that's really important for folks to understand is a lot of parents will take out a Parent Plus loan, and they will make an individual agreement with their child on how to best pay that loan back. But it's really important to recognize that a Parent Plus loan is the obligation of the parent themselves, and it can't be passed down. So
Yep.
while you may have a personal agreement, your parents will never be able to transfer the loan over to you. But also that means that your parents are eligible for any type of relief related to their specific circumstances. So you mentioned, I believe, did you say that your father was disabled at the moment?
Correct. Yeah. So the loans are under my father's name, and he unfortunately had stroke, and he's fine now, thank goodness. But he is under disability. He was working for the city of a city we live nearby. He was for the city, and he's on the final steps of earning his disability payment and retiring. So yeah, so that's something that we're hopefully hopeful for, that that we can follow that and just kind of get. I don't know if you know that if the disability, does it wipe out like 100% or whatever it is. We're very hopeful for that.
Yeah. Hi there. This is Natalia, just listening in, at Student Debt Crisis. The question would be, are they totally and permanently disabled? So it's not necessarily just disabled. And Cody, if you want to go through the stipulations, but if they're not able to work, then you can have 100% of the debt wiped out. And we do know people that have and have worked with borrowers. So, Cody, I defer to you.
Yeah, Christian, I actually have personal experience with this. So my family member was totally and permanently disabled and was able to have their loans discharged entirely.
Wow.
The way that this works is mostly you're going to need to get the right status when it comes to total and permanent disability from the Social Security Administration, right? So this is often an administrative title.
Yeah,
and then after that,
as of now, we're working on,
that's perfect.
Obtaining his total disability, because that's what it is. That's the current reality. He is currently totally disabled.
So then a borrower applies. In fact, you can go to a website. It's disabilitydischarge.com. And that's actually the federal government's website about this process.
Yep.
And after a borrower applies, they'll receive their discharge. And the last stipulation is that a borrower that receives this discharge cannot work. They cannot receive any income over the next few years. I believe it's a 2-year window. So there'll be periodic checking in to guarantee that you haven't worked during that time. Obviously, most borrowers who are totally and permanently disabled aren't somehow getting a job right after they apply for this. So it's typically not an obstacle, but that is the stipulation. Once you clear that window, the loans are completely discharged. There's no more checking in, and the process is complete.
Now, being honest, he is disabled, but he is able to work. He's not working at his old job anymore. He worked for the city. Now he's kind of doing mortgage stuff on the side just to kind of keep him busy. Would that factor in that? And it's not like a large income. It's just he is having some sort of income, but it's not very substantial.
Yeah, it unfortunately does. That's where I was trying to allude to, that it's different than disability, where you may be receiving some benefits. It needs to be totally and permanently disabled and not working. And I don't think it has to do with not working in the job you were suited to do. It's just not working at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so definitely I'm going to disabilitydischarge.com. There's more information on there. Just look it up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Feel free to email us if you have any questions.
Okay. And then I don't know if maybe someone else might have the same question that I just originally had, was, is the right approach right now, being that there's no interest, no payments until September, is the right approach just to not make payments, accumulate that money, and just come September time? Because what me and my family thought, I was like, okay, what if we keep on making payments and then this new government, takes off X amount of money, and that's money that we could have had. You know what I mean? So is that a good approach to have, you guys would say?
Well, it all depends on how long you've had your loan. This will get really complicated. And again, we're not financial advisors, but how much backlog of interest you have, meaning you just still be paying interest, not principal. So it really depends. For new, recent graduates, it may be, if they can afford to, it may be wise to be making payments because you're doing it at zero interest. But a lot of us, have been in and out of repayment programs. The interest gets quite complicated. So, and for most of us, the savings is the wrong word, but having the monthly budget surplus currently right now is beneficial, and getting ready to make those payments when they come on board is what we know a lot of borrowers are currently doing.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys and everything you guys do for us. Definitely will pay attention. I'll be around next time just to kind of get more information. Thank you guys.
All right. I'm going to take a moment to address some questions here in the Q&A box. Spencer and the team at Savvy, I think this is a great question for you all because your tool is so helpful. So I've got a question here from an anonymous attendee. They said they're in their 4th year of teaching, and they have a large amount of student loan debt. And they wanted to know what current forgiveness programs would they qualify for as a public school teacher?
Yeah, happy to jump in and answer this one. So there are potentially a couple. So depending on how long you've taught and in what subject and at what school, you could potentially be eligible for the Teacher Loan Forgiveness Program, which is a federal program specifically designed to provide student loan relief to teachers. The exact eligibility for certain forgiveness amount does vary. Basically, you could either receive $5,000 in forgiveness or $17,500 in forgiveness, depending on your teaching background, with the greater amount being more focused on not only Title I schools, but also certain subject areas. But the Savvy tool can help with some of that. The crisis help tool that we link to is specifically for income-driven repayment plans. So unfortunately, you won't see that full functionality there, but Savvy actually works with the National Education Association. So if you happen to be a member of NEA or you're of the state affiliate, you could potentially get access to another version of the Savvy tool that could help you through that application process. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is, that teacher loan forgiveness could be built around or on top of your public service loan forgiveness. So the Savvy tool can kind of determine which one and in which order is best for you. So again, would encourage you to look into whether your state affiliate through your union, if you are a member, you could potentially be able to use kind of another version of the Savvy tool. You also can email us at partners@bysavvy.com.
Great. And Spencer, I wanted to add one other point because I see a great question here from Sarah. Sarah wanted to know if parents with Parent Plus loans are also eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And it's a great question because we always have so many parents and older borrowers on the call. And Sarah, yeah, Parent Plus loans can become eligible for public service loan forgiveness. When a borrower parent gets a Parent Plus loan, that loan initially does not qualify, but a parent can consolidate into a direct consolidation loan, which then would qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So there's a little bit of important details there, but you should find out about that because if you are a parent working in public service, you may be eligible to have your loans forgiven. All right, let's go back to folks with their hands raised. I see Michael has his hand raised. Michael, I'm going to open up your mic. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Excellent. So yeah, I appreciate everything. Got a lot of my questions asked just by listening. I didn't actually even know about that FFEL differences, so that was kind of alarming to me because all my loans are pre-2010, right? So so I had a disability issue that I was kind of looking into because I had a pretty bad head injury. And believe it or not, it kind of impacts a lot of my abilities to navigate these kinds of things. I don't qualify for disability itself, though, because, I'm not blind. I'm not in a wheelchair. I don't have a disability that prohibits me from doing, simple jobs or anything like that. So I can't get a discharge that way. But, right now, I didn't realize it because I thought I'd done all of my different paperwork with all my different student loans. But apparently one I didn't take care of that was before the pandemic started, that ended up going into default before the CARE Act passed, right? Didn't even realize it. And didn't realize it through the last year because, I've been told that they'd been suspended, right? And so now I just found out about it. And because it had been in an income-based repayment plan beforehand, they said that I no longer qualified for getting a second income-based repayment plan. I don't really understand what the reasoning behind that is, and I'm not really sure what I can do. They told me that my only real options to make it come out of default was to pay it off in full, and that was like $60,000, right? It would be to pay it off in full or to consolidate it under a different loan or, have it absorbed by one of my other lenders. So I'm not really sure what the best move is now, and I really would like to get it out of default, less because of credit rating as much as just for, just so it's, I don't know, grows a little bit less or something like that. So yeah, if you have any ideas, I'd appreciate it, and I'll take the answer off air.
Yeah, so this is Cody at Student Debt Crisis. Michael, thanks for sharing your experience. It's definitely a very common experience. I think, you've received some pretty accurate information so far. When a borrower is in default, it is true that one of the consequences is that you theoretically have your entire loan balance due right then and there. That shouldn't entirely scare borrowers because you do have options. One of them is, as you mentioned, which is to consolidate your loans. Doing so early on in the default process does allow you to create a new loan, and that new loan is in good standing. So you've pretty much wiped the slate clean. That is likely a good option for you. Typically we want borrowers to understand consolidation before they take action because there will be consequences like having your interest capitalized and added to your principal balance. But obviously weighed against the consequences of default, it may be a good choice because going into default may have a really strong negative impact on your credit score. It can come with an inability to access financial aid. And for others, it prevents them from collecting their Social Security benefits, tax returns, and you may even see your wages garnished if you're further along in the process. So, default is something we really want to avoid. Consolidation is an option. If you're further along in the default process, there is the default rehabilitation program that we discussed earlier on in the presentation. But that is a little more challenging to complete. So again, you may choose to take this consolidation option now because you can wipe the slate clean as quickly as possible, as opposed to going through this more difficult rehabilitation process. For any borrower in default that's able to return to good standing, the main thing that they need to remember is that you're going to want to avoid default happening again, because obviously it's easy for borrowers who are struggling to fall back into default. So if you do consolidate, if you do rehab, the next step is to enroll in one of these affordable income-driven repayment plans so that hopefully you get yourself into a stable situation with the repayments where you won't fall into default again. And I don't know if anyone else, Natalia, Spencer, anyone else on the team has anything to add to that.
No, that was great. Thanks, Cody.
Great. Let's see, I've got another raised hand here from Russell. Russell, I'm going to go ahead and open up your mic when you're ready.
Hi.
Hey, Russell.
Hello. I'm probably not as young as a lot of your callers. I'm actually 71, almost 72. But 2008, I pretty much really had to bite the bullet. Lost my business collapsed, and I went through bankruptcy and regrouping and getting my life back together. I decided to go back to school and get a teaching credential. So I specialized in autism. Taught that for 10 years. My 10 years was up in last June, whereupon I retired. My understanding is that I have to be working to apply for public service loan forgiveness. I mean, actively working now.
Yeah, you need to be currently employed or have booked 10 years from 2007 to like 2017 would have been the 10 years, and applied while working.
I didn't start teaching till 2010. I taught 10 years and I made 120 payments.
Well, the program begun in 2007, so it would be any payments after 2007.
Okay. So should I go ahead and apply at this point? I was forced to retire. I was going to work another year and I was going to deal with this while I was still working, but March came along and I was in the hospital and was not able to go back to work. I did complete the year. I did some virtual teaching at the end of the year, but I got my 10 years in, I made my payments. I'm not currently working though, because I did have to retire.
You know, Spencer, maybe you've got some clarity on this. It's my understanding that a borrower can include any of their employment after October of 2007. But when a borrower applies for public service loan forgiveness, I believe they need to be currently employed for a qualifying employer for that application to be accepted. Is that the case, Spencer?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, if you fulfill all the other requirements for PSLF, direct loan, paid 120 payments, and worked for 10 years, I don't believe you have to be working for the PSLF eligible employer like when you actually apply, but you do have to have 10 annual certification forms filled out. And as I mentioned earlier, those can be done retroactively. Right. So it's not like you're stuck on that piece. So I hope that helps.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems like I met the requirements and, the timing was off is the only thing that seemed to be affecting me. But, okay, well, I'll work on it and see what happens and keep you guys posted on my story as it develops.
Yeah, Russell, you can reach out to us at Student Debt Crisis. My email personally is Cody, C-O-D-Y, at studentdebtcrisis.org. Feel free to email me. I can also, if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you some additional information about PSLF. So feel free to do so. And one other resource I want to make available to borrowers, because I think it's a really helpful one. For those that have unique obstacles, or maybe they've got a grievance with their loan servicer, or maybe they've been denied an application and they believe it was erroneously denied, there is an office at the Department of Education. It's called the Student Loan Ombudsman. And you can reach out to them and they will be able to provide resolution to any of the grievances you have with the programs or with your student loan servicer. And they typically respond with a relatively decent write-up related to why you may be denied or why you may be facing this issue. And so that can be a good way to get a very clear answer from the Department of Education, who typically is not very helpful in providing information.
Yeah, that's been my experience. I do have one other question. I'm not sure if it's relevant or not.
Sure.
Is it 10 years from when I started paying or 10 years from the date of my last loan?
So what it is, it's 120 monthly payments while you meet all of the qualifying factors. So all in all, it can be as little as 10 years, right? 12 months a year for 10 years. But it doesn't have to be consecutive. So borrowers can put a combined total of 120 monthly payments. If they worked for a nonprofit, then they went back to the private sector, then they went back to work in government. And so it can be longer than 10 years, but it's all about the number of payments, this 120 monthly payments.
Well, I should be able to negotiate that with a lot of talking and writing, I guess.
Well, and the other thing I'd say is that you have to remember it started in 2007 and you needed to have a direct student loan. And here's the really unfortunate part. Less than like 20% of the student loan portfolio was even direct loans at the time. So we see a majority of folks actually start to get direct loans in 2010. So the big influx of people getting student loan forgiveness is, last year and ongoing. So it's just rare to find somebody that meets all of that criteria, that's worked that 10-year period in a direct loan, was working full-time. Those are the only credits that count. They definitely made sure to create a lot of hoops to jump through in order to get it. However, through previous administrations, that's gotten easier. So for, newer student loan borrowers, it's definitely much more attainable to receive the benefits. But, it is discouraging for those of us that, have worked forever in public service and are not getting your due.
Well, I did know that if anything happens to me, which at my age, is more possible, that my federal loans would be forgiven. So I did pay my private loans off first. And I expected help from a California program for that didn't pan out. They didn't deliver because apparently I was teaching post-secondary is what they told me. It was a continuation of K through 12 services, but they eliminated me on that technicality from any help from the state.
Sorry, it was being weird.
So I just paid off.
Fucking with my phone, but
Paid off
so yeah,
personal stuff.
right when you were there, kind of a thing. So now you're going home.
Okay.
Well, Russell, it gets really complicated at times, unfortunately, with different types of teachers and education professionals. You just mentioned the secondary as opposed to post-secondary. We've also heard from, adjuncts who work full-time but have had difficulties with their public service loan forgiveness application. And then there's also, some obscure ways that some education employees are paid, where they're paid by third-party like processors. So there are some more niche experiences that can raise problems. I think those are exactly the kind of obstacles that you may want to reach out to the Student Loan Ombudsman's office about, because those are the types of situations where some additional guidance directly from the source can be extremely helpful.
Okay. Well, thanks. I won't take any more of your time, but thank you for answering my questions.
You're welcome. And as I mentioned, feel free to email me at cody@studentdebtcrisis.org, and I can provide any additional information that may be helpful.
Okay, I wrote that down. Thanks.
No problem. All right, why don't we turn back to one of the questions in our Q&A box here. I have a borrower from, let's see here. This is a borrower named Katie, and Katie wanted to know if she needs to recertify for an income-driven repayment plan during the pause that's been passed due to the COVID-19 relief.
I can jump in. Katie, thank you for asking your question. You do not have to recertify during the pandemic administrative forbearance, but it really might be a benefit for you to do so, especially depending on your personal situation. If your income is either stayed the same based off of your previous recertification, or especially if it's dropped, you'll want to do that now, because that will count. That repayment amount will be locked in for 12 months after the end of this administrative forbearance. So for me, for example, I enrolled in an IDR well over a year ago. And had it not been for the COVID forbearance, I would have had to recertify by now. But because of that, it's kind of been bumped along. So to answer your question simply, no, you don't have to, but there's the caveat that there's benefit in doing so now because of how long you could lock in that potentially lower payment.
Yeah, I was just going to second what you said, Spencer, that this is really beneficial for anyone who has had a reduction in hours, lost their job. If you've even been put on furlough, then you can lock in that $0 payment, and you'll know it will be for a year. And right now it's 0% interest. So this is good for folks that are looking to enroll or want to recertify. And as an advocate in this space, I do worry about the mess that is going to ensue with having everyone's loans come due at the same time. So that is, I think it's best to do it sooner than later.
Great. I've got a couple of folks who've flagged the same experience that I want to address here as well. This is in the Q&A box. A couple of borrowers have told us that they were not eligible for the COVID-19 relief that was offered by the federal government, but that they did receive some short-term relief at the beginning of the pandemic, and they're kind of confused about what's going on here. So I wanted to clarify for them and for any others who are listening. Natalia mentioned in her section of the workshop that private student loans were not included in the federal relief, and that includes all of the suspension of payments, interest, and debt collection practices that are now going until the end of September. What was offered in some states and through some private student loan companies was their own version of COVID-19 relief. And in fact, at the very beginning of the pandemic, a coalition of governors worked with the biggest private lenders in their state to create some short-term relief for private student loan borrowers. And that included places like California, Massachusetts, Illinois, I believe as well, a select handful. That was only short-term relief. And for many borrowers, that meant maybe just a few months of COVID-19 related relief on their private student loans. At this point, private lenders are able to offer as much or as little relief as they want. And private student loan borrowers are unfortunately left with fewer options. So if you have a private student loan, you're going to want to first contact your private lender and ask them what options are available to you. And as I mentioned, that often changes based on where you live and what type, which lender you have your loans through.
And I would just add on the advocacy front, we hear you. We know that private loans have been excluded. We know that these commercially held FFEL loans have been excluded. And there are still avenues through Congress where we can get bills that are similar to what we got in CARES Act to be on par for private student loan borrowers and for those commercially held FFEL loans. So we are going to continue fighting and making sure that your voice is heard and that we can include you, because we know that this has been definitely a misstep on the past administration's fault. I won't get into it, I digress, but there's still hope, and we want to hear from you, and we will be sharing those stories with lawmakers to make sure that the laws can change.
Yeah, great point, Natalia. I definitely received a lot of emails from folks leading into this workshop about private loans and their desire to have their experiences heard, and we will make sure to echo their voice. Okay, so back to folks that have their hands raised. I've got Kathy. Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and open up your mic, so go ahead.
Kathy, do we have you on?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next borrower that we've got here. Mariah, I see that you are also wanting to ask a question, so go ahead.
I do. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh my God. I do apologize in advance because if I ask a question that's already been asked, I'm still at work and watching a puppy on the side of me not attack my house. So
Working from home during the pandemic?
yeah, I'm working from home. I work at Quicken Loans, which is an amazing company. We do get to work from home, but I'm still at work, so I'm trying to pay attention to both things. So here's my situation. I received the notification that, hey, it's time to pay back loans. I do know that we're doing this whole forbearance or, CARE Act thing. I know where my loans are. They're at the federal loan servicing through the U.S. Department of Education. I thought about doing a consolidation because, to be very transparent, even with a married household, so it's me and my husband and my puppy, we do not have children, but we did file taxes together. The amount was very unaffordable. Then when I even called the federal loan agency and said, hey, what can we do? What if I file separate? It's still very unaffordable. And I guess my biggest concern is student loans are not based on income to cost of living. It's, do you have dependents? And if you don't, we're just going to take 10% of whatever we can get out of you, or whatever percentage plus paying your taxes and all that jazz. So my question is, even with looking at the income-based driven program, it was still very, very high. So what am I doing wrong? Am I filing my taxes with my husband, so that is causing me issues? And I'll transparently tell you, I sat on the phone with the federal loan agency or Fed loan or whoever it is for close to 2 hours 2 weeks ago. And he flipped those numbers upside down, put them on their head. We talked about, what if I paid you $200 a week? And it still, he told me I would still end up owing $7,000 in interest and potentially be put in default by the end of the year, without having the whole thing that's going on with President Biden. But my question to you is, in this scenario, when you're being told by the federal loan agency, hey, there's really nothing we can do, what do you do? Like, what is our, recourse for something like that?
Mariah, that is probably one of the most frustrating parts of, I think, the income-driven repayment plans. We talk about these programs on our workshop because they are the most helpful resources that borrowers have already on the books, but they are by far not perfect at all. And this is one of the biggest problems. You are right. The income-driven repayment plans do not care what your living situation is. They do not care what state you live in and how expensive it may be to live there. It is a formula. It is cold in that sense. And it just looks at your family size and your income and spits out a number. And so one of the biggest problems borrowers face is exactly that even with one of these programs, a borrower can still not be able to afford their monthly payments. And for that, it's extremely frustrating. Natalia, if you're on the line, I'm not sure if you've got really a recommendation.
Did I hear that you said you had Fed loan as your servicer? Are you in public service work?
I have, it says
one of these programs. A borrower can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think somebody else was talking.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it says Fed Loan Servicing, the U.S. Department of Education. That's where my loans are. But everything that you all said is who I usually go through, like serviceloan.gov, whatever it's called, the normal people who got the loans from Sally, from whoever else they were before.
Right. And do you work in a state or public service or government job?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like I said, transparently, I've gone back to school, you know, so I've done the go back to school thing up into my master's degree, which I have now. And they give you these numbers of forbearance. You know, you can do 3 years for this one and 3 years for that one. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm glad you all went through the graduated plan, because that was the one I was gonna go with. But now that I'm seeing even how that pans out to just, you know, almost spread debt, I mean, it's almost like that's not the best option either. So
Right.
I guess my other question is, do you all recommend people forbear, defer, or whatever it is those options are to delay making payments in hopes that one day this fight is going to happen and we will be able to cancel out all this debt?
So we do have hopes that we will be able to cancel some debt and more over the years, but we don't suggest, other than for a temporary hardship, that folks like go through forbearance and deferments, because that just compounds and capitalizes your interest. Unfortunately, you know, the name of the game is to pay it off as quickly as you can. If you frankly can afford the minimum, which many people don't, that's why so many are here, then you know, we say pay the minimum versus being in an income-based repayment program, unless you're executing the public service loan forgiveness option. So we feel that, you know, it's best to make those payments, you know, but you will incur interest. This is where, for some folks, because of the cost of living, the extended graduated repayment programs, that is why we include them, is some folks have to be on them, because those are the only programs where they can get the payment to what they can afford monthly without having to go into default, which is what we're trying to make sure everyone doesn't do, is go into student loan default.
Got it. Okay, and then I guess my last question, because I went to your website, and when at the top it says something like, were you impacted by the COVID situation? When you select no, it really doesn't give you anything else after that. Is this website and your system only for those that were impacted? And if you weren't impacted, like, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't impacted. Like I said, I work for a very good company that has been able to maintain my employment and did not change my pay. So being very blessed that way. But I do still want assistance. Like, you know, I still want to make sure I'm not conning myself to pay for something I can't afford and then eventually being in that default situation. So do you all, your website, assist people to just talk through this process before we call the federal loan company or whatever?
I can jump in here. Yeah, so the tool that we've been linking to today is a kind of scaled down version that we've opened up to folks, you know, during these challenging times. And even though it sounds like you may not have really specifically been impacted by COVID, as it pertains to that little question, would encourage you to just say yes so that you can explore those other options. And it's going to really help you through that income-driven repayment process. But to Natalia's point earlier, you know, it might be the case that your current graduated repayment plan might still be better, at least right now, than switching to an IDR. I just can't say that. The tool will make that recommendation for you. But I do encourage you to poke around there. Yeah, hopefully the tool can be helpful, and hopefully, you know, with the advocacy efforts of Student Debt Crisis, we can push for some bigger change here that's needed for borrowers like you.
No, I appreciate it. To be transparent, I posted it on my social media. I shared it with people at Quicken, and I will definitely be reaching out to help and participate more. I feel like there's a bigger issue, and the issue that I say is tuition shouldn't have cost this much. You know, I shouldn't have had to choose between do I want to have a house or do I want to pay back my student loan debt? And it goes double for my husband and I. So I just feel like, you know, if there is something that we can all do, just simply sharing our story or the information, I think it's something we should do, because if tuition wasn't as high as it was, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We would be debt free. So yeah.
You're absolutely right. And just to clarify, the tool we're sharing that's provided by Savvy, you can go to our website, which is studentdebtcrisis.org.
Okay.
And then you can explore the issue more. There's a place to share your story. You can let us know if we can share it with lawmakers, journalists, get the word out. So we're always happy to and want to include your voice in the work that we're doing. And I think, you know, folks like yourselves, they really need to hear from you. These people that are stuck where they make too much, but probably live in a big city is my guess, or an expensive area. And, you know, when it comes to, I live in Los Angeles, so I get it. When it comes to cost of living, you know, you cannot make that very high monthly payment. And I don't think they understand that there are a lot of folks in that space that are, you know, being left out of these programs. And sometimes they feel the only option is default. It isn't, you know, that again is why we showed some of those other, you know, more older programs, because they can help there. But they need to understand that these programs are definitely failing a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I told a lot of my friends this year and moving forward, if I didn't learn anything else from our previous president, President Trump, is that you're going to earn my vote. So I'm expecting some change with this. And if not, then I definitely have to consider, you know, how I vote moving forward, because this is important. So thank you for this call. I appreciate it. I am on the website and I'm sure you'll be hearing from me.
Thank you, Mariah. I just really want to say thank you for sharing your story. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure my colleagues, and your story can be lifted up and really be an example of why we need bigger change. So thank you.
All right, let's continue here. I'm looking at the clock. We've got a few more moments here, so I want to try to address a couple more of the questions here from folks with their hands raised. I'm going to go to next on the list here. Next, I see Shay. Shay, your mic is open. Feel free to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. So I'll try to be really succinct. My situation's a little different because I'm getting ready to retire. But since 2010, I spent a lot of time on student.gov trying to get answers, and no one really knew what the program was like. They were like, well, let's see how it goes. We're not sure what will be forgiven, how to do it. And my husband at the time was working. We did combined income. Again, we made too much. So it didn't make sense for me to do it because it was going to be a tax event for me if I did. So now I'm getting very curious about this whole discussion of how I can go back and sort of, I don't know, do a do-over with this retroactive program. But I have so many specific questions and needs, and I don't want to rob anyone else's time and yours today. But I have been in the question and answer, and it says that I can go on to go on to studentaid.gov, and there's savvy people there that can help me. Can you sort of frame this for me? Because I don't want to lose you today and then be lost again. Do I go on to Savvy and go on to student.gov and ask for one of you people? Like, are you a subservice of them now? Like,
no, this is a great question.
How do I really sit with someone and say, these are my scenarios? Because I could just go in circles. I mean, right now my plan is just that my loan will outlive me and I'll die, and that's how it's going to be forgiven. And I don't know if that's quite, I might have another way out.
No, that's unfortunate. You're not alone. Many people feel that way. I'll start and then Spencer kick in. But just to clarify, we are not affiliated with the Department of Education. Savvy is not affiliated with the Department of Education. The Department of Education is the Department of Education, and that is studentaid.gov. So that is where you can find, all of your information. Savvy is a company that we work with, a trusted partner, frankly, the only partner that we would trust in this space because it's been built by student loan advocates that really understand your needs. I've worked with their team for over a decade, the folks in the space for over a decade. So Savvy folks are separate. And, they do a lot of the same things, and I would argue better because studentaid.gov, when you call your loan servicer, you often get 50 different answers from 50 different people. So it's really great to use a computer system to find out which programs are best for you. I would say if you're looking towards retirement, that means that your income might possibly change and that you would be at, a less monthly income, and that could impact your repayment program. Before I go into that, Spencer, anything on, I guess, both repayment programs and just Savvy as well?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I also come from the advocacy world, and I'm proud to work for Savvy because of its specific mission. And it was really formed because all of this is so complex and hard to navigate. And, consumers and borrowers really needed a tool to navigate the process. And we typically work with partners like Student Debt Crisis, but also groups like the NEA and other groups to deliver the tool kind of to their audience. But because of COVID, we opened up a broader tool to the public, this crisis help tool that we've been talking about during the webinar. And unfortunately, we're still a small startup, so we don't have the capacity to provide that kind of customer support that we just wish that we could. So the crisis help tool does not have kind of that support that it looks like you might be looking for.
It is. I will pay someone to hold my hand at this point because I have wasted years and time, and I'm not exactly all that computer savvy. So I'll go on after this is over and try to use your tool. But I feel like without guidance, I may just fall into a crack in a hole.
Yeah, I hear you there. May I ask, who is your employer?
I work for a public school district.
Are you a member of NEA or a state affiliate?
Yes.
Okay, so you likely have access to that more customer service side of Savvy through that partnership with the NEA. So I'm going to give out my email. It's Spencer, SPENCER @bysavvy.com.
I'm sorry, what is it? Spencer at what?
At bysavvy.com, BYSAVI.com.
Okay.
And I'm going to connect you because you might have access to that kind of more in-depth side of Savvy that we're able to provide through our partnership with the NEA.
Okay.
Thank you, Ian. My email is now in the chat as well.
Okay. Yeah, because I have so many different caveats. I've been a teacher. I've worked in nonprofit. I've got Parent Plus loans. I'm trying to get ready to retire. My income's finally going to get reduced, so I might actually fit for a program. But I tried to talk to Nelnet today to get an estimate if I consolidate what the payment might be. And they're like, well, we won't know until you consolidate. So it's sort of like a catch-22. I could end up consolidating and then have all this new loan, 25 years, all this interest, and find out I'm only saving, I don't know, $100 a month. And so, you're trying to make informed decisions, but you don't have, there's too many moving parts at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, like that customer service is horrendous. They do have an ability to do that. We have an ability to do that in terms of projecting your payment. So shame on them, but that's why we exist. But I look forward to seeing your email, Shay, and I will connect you with your NEA affiliate. I'm going to turn it back over to Cody. I know we're at time, and I'm sorry we weren't able to answer as many questions, but perhaps with the contact information that Cody will provide, we can try to answer some of those over email.
And
thank you.
Just to add, we will be doing more of these workshops throughout the next few months. We know that there's been a lot of changes to your student loans, so we have folks that come back on. If you've been with us before, you may want to join, later into the hour to get your questions answered, and we'll try to get to as many after this. You can always email us. I'm Natalia. It's Student Debt Crisis. You can email us at info@studentdebtcrisis.org. And we'll do our best to direct you to the right organization or groups like Savvy to get help with your student loans. Cody?
That was perfect. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know on a Monday in the middle of the day, it can be difficult, but this information is so important. And I'd want to thank Spencer and Lindsay and Ian at the team at Savvy for being great partners in our effort to educate as many people as possible. With that, I will let everyone enjoy the rest of their day. And as Natalia said, please reach out if you have any questions and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can.